What made a 69-year-old retired librarian step into a dangerous police encounter? And what happened next that shocked an entire city? The reckoning of Hazel Greene is more than a story. It's a spark that ignited a fire of justice. Watch until the end to see how one woman's courage changed everything. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video because stories like this deserve to be seen. Every evening, just before the sun began to slip behind the rooftops of Briarwood Lane, Hazel Greene laced up her walking shoes, tucked her reading glasses into her cardigan pocket, and set out on her familiar route. She had walked this same stretch of neighborhood for nearly 15 years, long enough to know which homes planted tulips too early, which dogs barked at squirrels but not mailmen, and which neighbors waved with one hand and carried their troubles in the other. Hazel was 69, a retired librarian, and the sort of woman who remembered birthdays without needing a calendar and believed in handwritten thank-you notes. The world might have gotten louder and faster, but Hazel had held tightly to her quiet rituals. Her walk was one of them. It was her way of breathing, of listening, of remembering how much good still lived in the cracks of the world. But on that Tuesday evening, something changed. It began like any other evening. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of fresh-cut grass and fading magnolia blossoms. Birds were still chirping in the hedges, and the distant rumble of a lawnmower hummed like background music. Hazel turned the corner onto Walton Avenue, her pace steady, her steps familiar. She liked this stretch wide sidewalks, soft evening light, and the pharmacy at the end of the block, where Mr. Sanchez always stocked her favorite lemon drops. But as she neared the corner, Hazel noticed something off. Outside the pharmacy, just beyond the row of newspaper vending machines, a young black teenager stood frozen, his hands raised, palms forward. He looked about 16 or 17, tall and thin, with a backpack slung from one shoulder. His sneakers scuffed like he'd been walking all day. Hazel could see it in his posture, rigid, alert, afraid. His name, she would later learn, was Andre Lewis. Facing him was Officer Derek Vaughn. Hazel recognized him. Everyone in the neighborhood did. Vaughn was a large man with a reputation that arrived before he did. He had a military haircut, a jaw that rarely moved except to bark orders, and a history of escalated stops, though nothing ever stuck. He was known for power plays, pulling over teenagers for biking too fast, frisking middle schoolers for jaywalking, all under the banner of keeping the neighborhood safe. Now he was nose to nose with Andre Lewis, his hand resting dangerously close to the holstered gun on his hip. Hazel couldn't hear what was being said, but the body language spoke volumes. Vaughn's chest was puffed out. Andre's shoulders were tight. Hazel stopped walking, her instincts tightening like a knot in her stomach. Andre wasn't moving. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't resisting. But Vaughn's voice rose, sharp and clipped, cutting through the quiet street like glass on pavement. Hazel saw the boy flinch. Then Vaughn stepped forward, closing the distance, his finger pointed. His stance widened. Hazel didn't think. She simply moved. Her body, slow with age but firm with purpose, walked the remaining distance in a straight line. Her heart beat faster, but her voice, when it came, was calm and steady. "Excuse me, Officer Vaughn," she said gently, stopping a few feet from the scene. "Is everything all right here?" Vaughn turned, his hand still hovering over his weapon, and Hazel could see the flicker in his eyes, not confusion, not even surprise, irritation. as if being questioned was beneath him, as if Hazel, small and silver-haired, was just another voice to be swatted away. "Ma'am," he said with forced politeness, "this doesn't concern you. Please step back." Hazel didn't. She clasped her hands in front of her, her voice still soft but firmer now. "It does concern me. That young man isn't doing anything wrong. And your hand is on your holster." Andre glanced at her, his eyes wide, his lips pressed tight. Hazel saw the fear there, saw the gratitude buried beneath it. He looked like someone waiting to be erased. Vaughn's jaw tightened. This boy's been loitering, refused to comply. "I'm just doing my job." "I'm sure you are," Hazel said evenly. "But your job doesn't require intimidation. He's a child." For a moment, the world felt like it was holding its breath. A breeze moved through the trees. A car rolled by slowly. Someone across the street pulled out their phone, already filming. Vaughn saw it. His hand dropped from his holster slightly, but the tension remained, thick and pulsing in the air. Hazel didn't flinch, didn't move. She had once stood before angry school board members who tried to ban books. She had faced off with trustees who didn't believe in funding libraries. She'd fought quietly, consistently, her whole life. This was no different. "Let the boy go," Hazel said softly, her eyes never leaving Vaughn's. "This isn't justice. It's fear. And fear has no place in the hands of those sworn to protect." The line of her voice struck something. Vaughn blinked. He looked around. More people were watching now. One neighbor had stepped onto their porch. A woman near the pharmacy held her daughter's hand a little tighter. Eyes were on him. Witnesses. Andre lowered his hand slightly, cautiously, and took a half-step back. Still not running, just breathing. And that's when it happened. It was small at first. A twitch in Vaughn's jaw. A crack in the wall he built around himself. Then anger surged into his expression, fueled not by fear, but by humiliation. How dare this old woman challenge him? How dare she speak with such calm, such authority? Hazel knew the look. She'd seen it before in a white principal who'd refused to hire a black teacher, in a councilman who didn't like being corrected by a woman. It was the look of someone whose power was being questioned. And that, more than anything, scared them. But she didn't back down. She simply stood. The next moment came fast, and the world would never be the same after it. But in that moment, before the sirens, before the headlines, before the outcry, there was only Hazel, a woman nearing 70, with soft eyes and a spine of iron. A woman who'd spent her life reading stories of heroes and resistance, never realizing she would become one herself. And there was Andre, 16 and trembling, seeing for the first time what it meant for someone to stand beside you when it mattered most. And there was Vaughn, hand twitching, ego flaring, unaware that the choices he made next would unravel everything. It all began with a quiet act of courage, and Hazel Greene was just getting started. It happened in a blink. One breath, Hazel Greene was standing tall, calm, her voice even and composed, challenging Officer Derek Vaughn with nothing but words, and the next. The air itself seemed to crack. Vaughn's jaw clenched, his nostrils flared, and without warning, his fist shot forward with a brutality that did not match the stillness of the moment. A flash of movement, a sickening thud, and then silence. Hazel's body crumpled like paper in the wind. She fell backwards, her head striking the edge of the concrete sidewalk, with a sound that would echo in the minds of everyone who witnessed it. The kind of sound that didn't belong in a quiet neighborhood. The kind of sound that turned stomachs and broke hearts. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out. Her body hit the ground, and then it didn't move. Andre Lewis gasped. "Miss Hazel." He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he hovered over her still form, afraid to touch her, but unable to look away. Her silver hair was fanned out on the pavement and just above her temple. Blood began to bloom like a dark flower, soaking into the edge of her sweater. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was shallow, if there at all. The world snapped into chaos. "Did he just—" someone whispered. "Get it on video," another voice shouted. Phones were already recording, but now hands scrambled to hold them higher. A woman across the street sobbed into her hands. A teenager cursed under his breath, eyes wide. The couple with the small dog stood frozen, the leash limp in their hands, inside the pharmacy. Mr. Sanchez had dropped the newspaper he was holding and was already on the phone, shouting for an ambulance. Vaughn took a step back. His eyes darted around, scanning the growing crowd, the raised phones, the horrified stares. His face, just moments earlier twisted with authority and arrogance, began to shift. Panic. Denial. Calculation. "She came at me," he barked. "She got too close. She was aggressive. Nobody bought it. Not when the video footage showed Hazel standing with her hands at her sides, her voice gentle, her feet planted firmly on the ground. Not when the people watching had seen everything. Start to finish. "She didn't touch you," someone shouted. "You hit her. She's 70. You just assaulted an old woman." "Man, what the hell is wrong with you?" Vaughn's hand hovered near his radio, then dropped. His voice rose in volume, but not in conviction. "I said, step back," he yelled. "Everyone back up now." But no one moved. No one ran. Because this time it was different. This time, the community didn't look away. They didn't pretend it didn't happen. They stood, and they watched, and they filmed. And Hazel Greene lay unconscious in the middle of it all. The sirens came fast, less than 4 minutes later. But it felt like hours. The ambulance pulled up with lights flashing, a rush of red and white washing over the stunned faces on the sidewalk. EMTs jumped out and surrounded Hazel's body. They called her name, checked her pulse, lifted her gently onto a stretcher. Blood streaked the curb where her head had struck. One paramedic shook his head, urgency flashing in his eyes. "Head trauma. Possible skull fracture. We need to go now." Andre backed away, shaking. "Is she gonna be okay?" No one answered him. Inside the ambulance, Hazel's body was still. Her skin had gone pale. An oxygen mask was placed over her mouth, and a paramedic held her hand as her blood pressure dropped. "We're losing her," someone whispered. As the doors slammed shut and the ambulance sped away, sirens howling through Briarwood Lane, the crowd remained. And so did the cameras. The video footage was uploaded before the ambulance even reached the hospital. It started as a 30-second clip on a local teen's social media page, a silver-haired woman standing between a cop and a kid, speaking softly. Then, without warning, she's punched. Her body falls. The screen shakes as people gasp. Then a boy's voice. Trembling. "Miss Hazel." The video went viral in under an hour. By the time Hazel reached the emergency room, unconscious and listed in critical condition, her name was trending nationwide. Elderly woman, assaulted by officer while defending teen. Who is Hazel Greene? Another act of police violence caught on camera. In a hospital room filled with blinking monitors and whispered medical codes. Nurses worked to stabilize her. Blood was still seeping from the wound at her temple. Her heart rate faltered. A CT scan was ordered immediately, revealing a small but dangerous brain bleed. The surgeon's voice was grim. "We need to relieve the pressure now." Outside the operating room, nurses updated a file with the words "severe blunt force trauma to the head." One of them, tears stinging her eyes, whispered to a colleague. She was just trying to help. In the waiting room, strangers began to gather. A local pastor who'd seen the video. A schoolteacher who'd once had Hazel visit her class to read to the children. People brought flowers, cards, candles. A makeshift vigil began forming on the sidewalk in front of the pharmacy. Chalk messages written on concrete. "We stand with Hazel. Justice for Miss Greene. Courage lives here." And far across town, in an office stacked with legal folders and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a woman answered her phone. It was the hospital. "Ms. Greene," the nurse said gently. "Your mother, Hazel. There's been an incident." Claire Greene, Hazel's daughter, and the assistant district attorney for the county felt the world tilt beneath her feet. An hour later, she stood by her mother's hospital bed, trying not to cry. Hazel's face was swollen, her head wrapped in gauze, tubes connected to machines that beeped in slow, heart-wrenching rhythm. Claire didn't speak at first. She just stood there, staring, her jaw tight, her fists clenched. She had spent years prosecuting bad cops. She'd built cases against fraud, corruption, abuse of power. She'd seen injustice, but not like this. Never this personal. Never her mother. And as she stood there, as the images from the viral video played again and again on every screen across the country, Claire Greene made a quiet promise. This was no longer just a case. This was personal. This was war. By the time the first overnight news cycle ended, Claire Greene was sitting alone in her office, long past midnight, staring at her mother's name in black ink on a white hospital chart. Patient Hazel Elaine Greene. Status critical. Injury. Blunt force trauma to the head. Origin assault. She had read it a dozen times. Each word was another cut. Each sentence another weight. Yet, her hands remained steady, her spine unbending, her tears, those had come earlier in the sterile silence of the hospital hallway, where no cameras could see and no reputation could falter. Claire was 44 years old, the assistant district attorney of Westbridge County, and no stranger to tragedy. She had prosecuted gang leaders, corrupt politicians, even dirty cops. She'd put her career on the line more than once to pursue justice in cases everyone else said were too messy, too dangerous. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened to her mother. The assault had been recorded from 6 different angles. Claire had watched each clip, over and over. The soft tone in Hazel's voice, the calm way she stepped between a child and a man with a badge, the open-handed courage of it. And then the blow, Officer Derek Vaughn's fist cutting through the air like a blade, knocking Hazel to the pavement with brutal, deliberate force. Blood pooling at the curb. A crowd screaming. Her mother's body crumpled like a storybook left in the rain. Claire hadn't been able to breathe for almost 10 seconds after she saw the video. Now, sitting behind her desk in the district attorney's office, she tried to summon something resembling focus. A dozen files were open across her desk: complaints, disciplinary reports, Vaughn's internal records, and most damning of all, a confidential folder she had obtained just 2 weeks earlier as part of a sweeping investigation into internal misconduct within the Westbridge Police Department. Vaughn's name had been in that file. Not once, not twice, 8 times. 8 complaints of excessive force. 4 written by civilians, 3 by fellow officers, and 1 by a school administrator after Vaughn had reportedly interrogated a 14-year-old without a guardian present. And every single complaint had been either dismissed or quietly buried under phrases like insufficient evidence or officer acted within departmental guidelines. Each case lacked a follow-up. Each file bore the same signature of then Sergeant Brad Holbrook, now the acting chief of police. Claire leaned back in her chair, her jaw tightening. They knew. She whispered into the quiet. They all knew. And yet Vaughn was still on the street, still in uniform, still armed, still capable of knocking a 69-year-old woman unconscious in broad daylight, while dozens of witnesses watched. Her mother, Hazel Greene, the woman who had read her To Kill a Mockingbird when she was 7, the woman who taught her to speak with conviction, to act with purpose, to never fear the truth, even when it cut deep. Hazel was the one who told Claire, at age 10, if you see something wrong, don't wait for permission. Speak up, loud, clear, proud. Claire had followed that advice all her life, and now it had brought her here. She exhaled slowly and turned toward her office door. A knock. Then Greg Templeton, her most trusted deputy, stepped inside, carrying the first draft of the incident report and a flash drive labeled simply Vaughn, civilian assault footage. His eyes, bloodshot and heavy, met hers with a silent question. "How is she?" he asked quietly. Claire looked away. "Unconscious. The swellings stabilized, but the neurologist said, we won't know for another 24 hours, maybe longer." Greg nodded and sat across from her, saying nothing for a moment. Then, gently, "You shouldn't be the one to handle this, Claire. We can assign it out. I'll take it." "You've got every reason to." "No," Claire said, her voice firm. "That's exactly why I will handle it." Greg hesitated. "But it's your mother. The media's going to be watching every move. If you bring charges, they'll say you're making it personal. If you don't, they'll say you're protecting your own. You can't win either way." "I'm not trying to win," she snapped, then softened her tone. "I'm trying to do the job. The right way." She picked up the flash drive and turned it over in her fingers. "I've prosecuted strangers. I've gone after officers before. But this is different. I know that. Which is exactly why I'm not going to treat it like a personal vendetta. I'm going to treat it like the law demands." Greg leaned forward. "Then you should know Vaughn's union rep has already reached out. They're spinning this hard, claiming Hazel lunged at him, saying he feared for his life." Claire's lips curled with disbelief. "He feared for his life from a librarian in a cardigan. They're calling it a misunderstood escalation, and the police chief hasn't made a public statement yet." Claire narrowed her eyes, because Holbrook's trying to cover himself. He protected Vaughn for years. He's implicated in this, whether he says a word or not. Greg placed another folder on her desk, this one thinner but no less dangerous. "Also, we pulled his body cam footage. It's corrupted. Vaughn claims it malfunctioned during the altercation." "Of course it did," Claire muttered. She stared at the file's evidence of a system built not on accountability, but on denial. A network of silence and protection. The badge that shielded. The paperwork that buried. The politics that enabled. And now, her mother was in a hospital bed fighting for her life, because no one had stopped a violent man when they had the chance. Claire rose from her chair, gathering the reports into a single stack. "We charge him," she said. "We charge Vaughn with felony assault. We subpoena his personnel records, and we open a full review into why his previous complaints were never pursued. If it leads to Holbrook, so be it. If it leads further, we follow it." Greg nodded. "You sure?" Claire stared out the window, the lights of Westbridge flickering like warning signals. Her city, her responsibility. "I'm not here to protect reputations," she said. "I'm here to protect the truth, even when it hurts." A silence settled in the room, a weighty, solemn quiet that neither of them disturbed. Then Claire spoke again, her voice low, resolute. "If my mother survives, she'll want me to do this right." She turned back to her desk and whispered the words like a vow. "And if she doesn't, I'll do it anyway." It began with a spreadsheet, just names and dates at first. A color-coded index on Claire Greene's desk in the Westbridge County District Attorney's office. Officer Derek Vaughn's name appeared 8 times, each tied to a complaint. But, as the hours passed, as Greg Templeton and the rest of Claire's investigative team dug deeper, those 8 complaints blossomed into a full-blown pattern. A damning one. A network of silence, cover-ups, and quiet threats. This wasn't just about one man's violence anymore. This was about a system that had armored him in shadows. The further they looked, the worse it became. Internal affairs files were redacted beyond recognition. One report filed by a woman named LaShawn Baker, who claimed Vaughn shoved her teenage son into a patrol car without cause, had the investigator's notes completely blacked out. The final line simply read, "Case closed. No wrongdoing found." When Claire's team contacted LaShawn directly, she hesitated at first. Then her voice cracked. "They told me to let it go," she whispered. "Said if I didn't, they'd find something on my boy. Said I was lucky he wasn't charged with resisting." I was scared. There it was. Coercion, threats, disappearing evidence. And Vaughn, at the center of it, skating by with a clean record on the surface, while underneath lay a trail of fear and silence. Greg dropped a thick manila envelope on Claire's desk the following morning. "You're going to want to see this," he said. His jaw clenched. Inside were internal emails from the Westbridge Police Department, leaked by a sympathetic officer who'd grown tired of watching things rot from the inside. The emails revealed a timeline. Whenever a complaint came in about Vaughn, it was routed first to a familiar trio, Sergeant Brad Holbrook, Lieutenant Miles Ramsey, and Union Rep Gerald Knox. The 3 men responded like clockwork, denying, deflecting, or rerouting investigations into bureaucratic black holes. One message, dated April 14th, just 3 months before Hazel's assault, sent chills through Claire's spine. "Need this one shut down. Vaughn solid. Witness is shaky. Push it through IA and close it by Friday." Signed, Holbrook. Another message from Knox, a year earlier, referred to a woman who filed a harassment complaint against Vaughn after he allegedly followed her home from a traffic stop. "She's got no pull. Threaten a libel suit if she keeps talking. Vaughn's our guy. We protect our own." Claire slammed the folder shut. Her own mother had nearly died because their guy was never held accountable. "This is it," she said to Greg. "This is what we've been trying to prove for a year. The corruption investigation we started, this is the missing link." Vaughn isn't just a violent cop. He's a symptom of an institution that's been covering for itself. Lisa Jennings, the team's lead investigator, joined them at the war table of documents and red string. She'd spent the last 3 nights cross-referencing Vaughn's incidents with personnel files. "There's more," she said, sliding over a series of internal memos. Of the 6 officers who tried to file formal statements against Vaughn over the last 5 years, 4 were reassigned within a month. 1 took early retirement. 1's now working a desk job in records. Claire scanned the notes. "Retaliation," she said. Lisa nodded. "And it gets deeper. I found 2 witnesses, civilians, whose original statements about Vaughn's misconduct were changed in the official reports. You're saying they were rewritten, more like rewritten for them. Both say they never signed the final versions." Claire felt her pulse quicken. "And no one caught this." "They did," Lisa said. "They just didn't care." The silence in the room was deafening. These weren't mistakes. They were deliberate decisions, calculated, repeated. Vaughn had been protected not in the shadows, but in broad daylight by signatures on forms, closed-door meetings, union shields, and bureaucratic smokescreens. No single department had made this happen. It was an ecosystem, a culture, and now Claire had to decide what to do with it. If she went public too early, she risked blowing the case. If she waited too long, she risked being complicit in another cycle of silence. "We go after the enablers," Claire said finally. "Not just Vaughn. We build the case against Holbrook, Ramsey, and Knox. We tie them to the complaints, the cover-ups, the retaliation. We show the pattern. Then we burn it all down by the book." Greg frowned. "You think the chief will sit quietly while we drag him into this gnome?" Claire said. "He'll fight like hell. But he doesn't get to hide anymore." Within the hour, subpoenas were drafted for departmental files spanning 10 years. Claire called in a forensic data team to recover redacted casework. She met with internal affairs officers off-site. Away from the precinct, at least 2 admitted they were told to stay out of Vaughn's mess. One even showed Claire a handwritten note left in his locker, the day after he pushed back on a case. "Some dogs bite. Some dogs get put down. Choose wisely." Claire's chest tightened with rage. "This isn't just a rogue officer," she said later in a press conference, her voice unwavering before a crowd of reporters. "It's a web of complicity that has allowed violence to fester. We will identify every thread and every hand that tied it." The local paper ran the headline, "DA links Hazel Greene assault to larger police cover-up." But Claire didn't read the articles. She didn't watch the interviews. Her focus remained where it needed to be, on the files. The evidence, the names, the truths no one else had been willing to face. Her mother was still in the hospital, unconscious. Machines still measured her breath. Monitors still blinked their cold warnings. But now, Claire had turned the pain into fuel, her grief into purpose. Hazel had always told her, "Expose the root, not just the rot." And now Claire was doing exactly that. The rot had a name, Vaughn. The root had many, and they were all about to be unearthed. The first time Claire Greene saw Andre Lewis walk into her office, he looked exactly like what he was, a 16-year-old boy trying to carry a weight the world should never have asked him to bear. His shoulders were hunched, his sneakers scuffed, and his hands trembled ever so slightly as he gripped the sides of the chair she motioned him into. But behind the nervous energy in his eyes was something else: resolve. The quiet, heavy kind that came from witnessing something no child should, and choosing not to run from it. He sat across from Claire in a conference room at the district attorney's office, flanked by a juvenile counselor and a soft-spoken community advocate named Ms. Joy, who had been working with his family since the assault. Claire kept her voice low and calm. "You're not in trouble. Andre, you're not a suspect. You're a witness. And we're here because what you saw, what you recorded, matters. You matter." He nodded once, eyes fixed on the manila folder in front of her, the one with his name and a single label. Key Witness Lewis. It was Claire's idea to bring him in privately first. No courtroom, no reporters, just the truth, shared quietly and without pressure. She pressed play on the tablet beside her. The screen lit up with the video Andre had captured with shaking hands that afternoon outside the pharmacy on Juniper Avenue. The footage was raw but clear. Officer Vaughn barking commands at Andre, his hand hovering near his holster. Then Hazel Greene, Claire's mother, stepping in, her voice calm, her posture steady. And then the punch, the sickening thud, the fall, the blood. Andre flinched as the moment replayed. "I didn't know what to do," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I just froze." Claire leaned in, her voice gentle. "But you didn't run, you didn't hide. You stayed, and you recorded it. I thought if I had it, someone would believe me. 'Cause people always say they didn't see nothing, or the police say it went different than it did. I needed someone to see it." Claire nodded slowly. "And they will. Because of you." Andre's video had already made its rounds on social media. It had been viewed over 1 million times. News anchors had debated it. Civil rights attorneys had praised it. But Claire hadn't released the full footage publicly, not yet. She was saving that for court. Because despite what the public believed, real justice still happened in silence. In testimony, under oath. Claire slid a form across the table. "This is a voluntary witness affidavit. I'm asking you to make a formal statement. You'll be called to testify at Officer Vaughn's trial. Only if you're comfortable." Andre looked at her, eyes wide. "In court." In front of him, "Yes," Claire said, "but you won't be alone. And you'll have someone next to you every second. I promise." He glanced at Ms. Joy. She gave a small, firm nod. Claire could see the wheels turning in his mind. The fear, the doubt, the shame. "He said it was my fault," Andre whispered, almost to himself. "He said I was acting suspicious, that I matched someone's description. But I was just waiting for my grandma. She was picking up her meds. I was just—" Claire interrupted gently. "Andre, listen to me. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. That officer singled you out. And my mother, she saw it. She knew it wasn't right. That's why she stepped in." His lip trembled. "I didn't mean for her to get hurt." Claire's throat tightened, but she held steady. "You didn't hurt her. Vaughn did. And the only person who should feel guilty is the one who threw the punch. Not you." There was a long silence. Then Andre reached for the pen and signed the affidavit. That moment quiet, unspectacular, would later become one of the most important turns in the case. Claire's legal team prepared Andre for the courtroom. They coached him on how to stay composed under cross-examination, how to speak clearly, how to breathe, but none of them needed to teach him how to tell the truth. That part came naturally, when the day came. Andre walked into the courtroom wearing a navy blue sweater and a tie his uncle had lent him. He sat in the witness box, his knees bouncing slightly, until Claire gave him a small nod from across the room. Then he began. "My name is Andre Lewis. I'm 16. I go to Eastbrook High." He told them everything. How he'd waited outside the pharmacy, minding his own business. How Vaughn approached him, aggressive from the start. How Hazel Greene stepped in and tried to speak calmly. How Vaughn's eyes narrowed and his voice rose. And then how he hit her. Hard. No hesitation, no warning. He held up the phone. "This is the video. I shot it myself." The courtroom was silent as the footage played. When it ended, Andre's hands were still shaking, but his voice wasn't. "I don't know why she stepped in," he said, his eyes locked on the jury. "But I'm glad she did, 'cause if she hadn't, I think he would have hurt me instead." Claire let those words hang in the air. She didn't need to say more, because the jury saw the truth in Andre's eyes. They saw the way he trembled. They saw the way he remembered everything not as a rehearsed story, but as someone who relived it every time he closed his eyes, after the hearing. As Claire escorted him to the hallway outside the courtroom, Andre stopped suddenly. "Do you think she'll be okay?" he asked, almost too quietly to hear. Claire hesitated, then answered honestly, "She's fighting. That's what she does best." Andre looked down. "I'm sorry, I couldn't do more." Claire touched his shoulder. "Andre, you did everything right. And you just gave her voice back in that courtroom. That's more than anyone could have asked for." He nodded, swallowing hard. Then he turned and walked away with Ms. Joy beside him. Claire watched them go, a lump rising in her throat. This boy, whose life could have ended in a moment, had become the case's moral compass. Not because he was perfect, or polished, or powerful, but because he had the courage to speak when the world wanted him silent. She looked down at the affidavit in her hand, still warm from where he'd signed it. Andre Lewis, key witness, truth teller, survivor. And in this battle for justice, sometimes the most powerful voice came from the one everyone had underestimated. It started with a voicemail. Claire Greene returned to her office late one evening after reviewing the final deposition notes from Andre Lewis's testimony. Her phone, still face down on the edge of her desk, blinked with a single red light. One new message. She pressed play. The voice was gruff, controlled, too careful. Assistant District Attorney Greene. "This is Captain Randall Price of the Westbridge Police Union. I'd like to speak with you privately. You're making a lot of noise. Noise that could have consequences. Call me." She didn't. The next morning, the noise began. By 9 o'clock. 3 local news stations were running segments questioning Hazel Greene's state of mind the day of the incident. One broadcast featured grainy footage of her outside the Westbridge Library nearly a year earlier, shouting at a city contractor blocking the sidewalk ramp. "She has a history of confrontational behavior," the anchor stated, with thinly veiled contempt. Claire's jaw clenched as she watched the coverage from her office. The smear campaign had officially begun. By noon, anonymous posts flooded online message boards accusing Claire of weaponizing her office to settle a personal score. Memes circulated. Hashtags surfaced. Someone even created a mock web page called Justice for Vaughn, complete with out-of-context body cam clips and manipulated quotes. It was coordinated, deliberate, and it bore the fingerprints of one man, Captain Randall Price, a former officer turned union boss. Price had a reputation for getting dirty when things got too clean. He wasn't subtle, and he wasn't afraid of optics. He'd fought against every misconduct charge levied in the last 5 years. He'd threatened council members, bulldozed citizen review boards, and called civil rights protesters performative parasites in a leaked email the year prior. Now he had his sights set on Claire. The next blow came 2 days later, the blue flu. 73 officers, nearly a third of the Westbridge force, called in sick within 24 hours. Patrols were understaffed. Response times tripled. And Price stepped in front of microphones with an expression of mock concern. "Our officers are exhausted," he told reporters. "They feel under attack by a DA's office that has turned its back on them. This isn't about protest. This is about morale. We're human, too." Claire watched that press conference from a side room at the courthouse, her hands clenched around a mug of black coffee she no longer tasted. Greg Templeton stood beside her, shaking his head. "He's daring us to back down," Greg said. Claire didn't blink. "Then we don't flinch." Still, the pressure was mounting. Anonymous death threats began arriving at the DA's public inbox. Hazel's name trended for the wrong reasons. Conspiracy theorists claimed she had staged the incident to help her daughter's career. Local police began stonewalling subpoenas. Claire's own investigators were followed in unmarked cars. It was a full-court press from the establishment, a test of will, ethics, and backbone. So Claire did the only thing left to do. She stepped forward. At exactly 3 o'clock that Friday, Claire Greene walked to the podium set up in front of the Westbridge County Courthouse. The air was brisk. Reporters swarmed, flashes popping like static. Behind her stood Assistant DA Greg Templeton, Investigator Lisa Jennings, and 3 junior prosecutors, all volunteers. No police detail, no extra security, just courage. She wore a navy blue blazer and a white blouse, unapologetic and unshaken. "I will be brief," she began. "This is not a press conference about politics, rumors, or distractions. This is a statement of principle." She held up a copy of the official charging documents against Officer Derek Vaughn. "On the evening of August 12th, my mother, Hazel Greene, was assaulted in public view by an officer whose history of misconduct had been repeatedly buried by those sworn to uphold accountability. In the weeks since, my office has uncovered substantial evidence of not only Officer Vaughn's repeated abuse of power, but also a systematic effort by supervisors, internal affairs, and the police union to protect him." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire didn't pause. "I want to be clear. This office is not at war with law enforcement. We are at war with impunity." She leaned slightly toward the microphones, to Captain Randall Price, and to anyone attempting to derail this prosecution through intimidation, disinformation, or organized disruption. Know this: I will not yield. We will prosecute this case based on facts, not fear. We will pursue every lead, every file, every silence that speaks volumes. And we will do it transparently, constitutionally, and without apology. A murmur of approval stirred among the reporters. Cameras shifted. Questions buzzed like bees. One voice rose above the rest. "Ms. Greene, are you worried the blue flu will impact public safety?" Claire didn't blink. "What worries me more," she said, "is a public that accepts threats from those who've taken oaths to serve them. But to answer your question directly, yes, I am concerned, which is why I've requested immediate support from neighboring jurisdictions and the State Attorney General's office. Westbridge will not go unprotected nor unexamined." Another voice: "What about the attacks on your mother's character?" Online forums suggest. Claire cut the question short with a raised hand and a fierce stare. My mother is a 70-year-old retired librarian. She stepped in to prevent an injustice, not to incite one. She has served this city longer than most people criticizing her have been alive. I will not dignify rumors. I will prosecute facts." Her voice didn't waver, not once. After the conference ended, Claire turned and walked straight back into the courthouse. Inside, Lisa was waiting. "That was a moment," she said softly. Claire nodded. "Now, let's make it matter." Later that evening, Hazel briefly opened her eyes in the hospital. It was the first time in 13 days. Claire sat beside her, holding her hand, gently brushing silver strands from her temple. She didn't say much, just leaned forward and whispered, "Don't worry. Mom, we're not backing down." And in the low light of that sterile room, Claire Greene knew the battle ahead wouldn't be measured in headlines or hashtags, but in every decision she made, every threat she faced down, every step she took toward justice, even if she had to take it alone. But she wasn't alone. Not anymore. The tide had turned. And now, the Union's shield would have to face something it was never built to withstand the truth. The day Officer Derek Vaughn walked into the Westbridge County Courthouse in a pressed gray suit, his badge no longer pinned to his chest. The air felt heavier than usual, like the town itself had stopped breathing. It was just after 9 in the morning. The sun hadn't burned through the clouds yet, and a faint mist hung over the courthouse steps. Reporters lined the sidewalk like sentinels. Protesters held up signs, "Justice for Hazel." "End the cover-up." "Protect, not punish." And through it all, Claire Greene walked up the steps with a face carved from granite. Vaughn was finally going to trial. It had taken 3 months of relentless pressure, 3 months of stonewalling from the Union, 3 months of Claire's team threading together every piece of evidence, internal files, witness statements, Andre's video, and expert medical reports. The indictment had landed like a lightning bolt: felony aggravated assault, misconduct in office, and falsifying a police report. The courtroom filled within minutes. Claire stood at the prosecution table. Vaughn sat across from her, flanked by his attorney, Wallace Rudd, a man known for his sharp suits and sharper spin. Rudd had made a career defending law enforcement officers in high-profile cases, often relying on one strategy: cast doubt, shift blame, muddy the water. And that's exactly what he tried to do in his opening statement. Rudd painted Hazel Greene not as a community-minded elder, but as a confused, impulsive woman who inserted herself into a lawful police encounter. He described Vaughn as a decorated officer, trained for high-stress situations, acting in good faith to ensure public safety. Claire didn't flinch. When it was her turn, she walked slowly to the jury, her heels echoing on the polished floor. "This case," she said, "is not about confusion. It is about clarity. And the clearest evidence of all is what you will see with your own eyes: video footage of a woman standing calmly, speaking respectfully, and then being struck down by a man who was sworn to protect her." She paused, then turned to look at Vaughn directly. No badge gives someone the right to become a fist. The prosecution began with the obvious Andre Lewis. He returned to the stand, composed and steady. Claire had prepped him carefully, but it was the truth that carried his voice. He described the moment Officer Vaughn approached him outside the pharmacy, the aggressive tone, the looming presence, the fear that settled in his chest like a stone. And then Hazel's arrival, her voice like a lifeline. She wasn't yelling, Andre said. She was calm. She just said, Let's talk. And he didn't like that. Then came the video. It played on a large screen mounted beside the judge's bench. The room went still as the footage unfolded. Hazel stepping forward, her palms open, her words barely audible over Vaughn's shouts. And then his fist, her fall, the sickening sound of skull against concrete. Claire didn't speak. She let the jury sit with what they'd just seen. No explanation needed. Rudd tried to chip away at Andre on cross-examination. "You were scared, weren't you?" he asked. "Yes? And you were being questioned by a police officer, someone you might already see as a threat." Andre held Rudd's gaze. He became a threat the moment he hit her. Next came the paramedics, then the ER doctor who treated Hazel that night. They testified to the severity of her injuries: cranial trauma, 2 fractured ribs, and a concussion that left her unconscious for 48 hours. Then came Claire's star expert, Dr. Leona Mercer, a former FBI behavioral specialist. She walked the jury through the body language in the video: Hazel's non-threatening posture, Vaughn's tightening fists, his proximity, his escalation. In law enforcement training, Dr. Mercer said, this is known as a pre-assault indicator. Vaughn was not responding to a threat. He was reacting to being challenged. Still, Rudd was relentless when it was his turn. He called character witnesses officers who claimed Vaughn was level-headed, committed, and misunderstood. He tried introducing old clips of Hazel from town hall meetings where she'd spoken passionately, framing her as combative and prone to confrontation. But none of it stuck. Not in the face of the video. Not in the face of Hazel's life of service. Not with a courtroom watching every maneuver. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Vaughn took the stand. It was a calculated risk. Rudd had warned him one misstep, and the entire defense could collapse. But Vaughn insisted. He wanted to explain himself. He sat straight, his voice calm. "I was responding to what I believed was a suspicious individual," he said, nodding toward Andre, who sat quietly in the gallery. The young man wouldn't answer my questions clearly. Then a woman approached Ms. Greene and got in my face. I thought she might be reaching for something. It happened fast. Claire rose slowly. Cross-examination. "Officer Vaughn," she said, "you testified that my mother, Hazel Greene, got in your face and reached toward you. That's correct." She walked to the screen, played the video again. "Can you point to the moment where she reaches for you?" Vaughn squinted, hesitated. "It's subtle. Is it before or after you yelled?" "Back off." "Before." Claire froze the frame. Hazel, standing still, hands by her side. "And this is what you perceived as a threat, It was the situation. You weren't there." "No," Claire said softly. "But the jury is now, and they've seen what happened." She let silence follow. "Then, is it true, Officer Vaughn, that in your original report, you failed to mention any aggressive action by Ms. Greene?" He stiffened. "I was shaken. I forgot." "You forgot the reason you struck a civilian. It was chaotic. Then why did you describe her in the report as advancing rapidly when the footage shows otherwise?" Vaughn opened his mouth, closed it. The lie had been caught. The room felt as if it had tilted slightly. No further questions. By the time court adjourned that day, even some of Vaughn's staunchest defenders in the gallery had stopped meeting his eyes. The inconsistencies were undeniable. The footage spoke louder than his words, and his testimony had only confirmed what Claire already knew: he hadn't been afraid. He'd been offended, and in his world, that was enough to strike. But now, It was up to 12 citizens to decide if offense justified violence and whether justice would finally strike back. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, not 6 days, not 6 weeks, just 6 hours. That's all it took for 12 strangers, 8 women, 4 men to watch the footage, study the contradictions in Vaughn's testimony, and come back with a single, unanimous truth. Aggravated assault. Guilty. The words dropped like thunder inside the courtroom. No dramatic gasps, no outbursts, just the echo of finality, steady and precise. Officer Derek Vaughn didn't flinch when the verdict was read. He kept his jaw clenched, eyes forward, as though sheer stillness might protect him from the weight of justice. But his attorney, Wallace Rudd, sank slightly in his chair, like a man who knew the tide had turned for good. Claire Greene closed her eyes, only for a moment, letting the breath she'd been holding finally escape. In that breath lived everything: the fear, the rage, the restraint. 3 months of pressure, intimidation, doubt. All of it collapsed into that single exhale. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply nodded, quietly, respectfully, like someone paying tribute to the truth that had just prevailed. When court adjourned, Vaughn was remanded into custody immediately. The bailiff didn't give him time for a final handshake. No ceremonial march out. Just the click of handcuffs and the sound of doors opening to a future he never thought he'd face. Outside the courthouse, the world had already changed. A crowd had gathered by early morning. By verdict time, it had swelled into hundreds. Clergy stood beside teachers, grandmothers beside students, black, white, brown, everyone shoulder to shoulder in the late afternoon light. They stood not for spectacle, but for witness. When news of the conviction broke, someone started clapping, then another, and another. Soon, the sidewalk trembled beneath the weight of unified applause, not for vengeance, but for the kind of justice rarely spoken and even more rarely seen. Signs waved in the air. Hazel spoke, and we heard. Accountability is not optional. Claire Greene for justice. And standing just behind the barricades, his hoodie pulled up, his eyes full of something like quiet redemption, was Andre Lewis. He didn't cheer. He didn't shout. He simply stood still, hand pressed to his heart. Inside the DA's office later that night, Claire gathered her team. She didn't offer a toast, no champagne, no victory dance, just folders, documents, timelines. "We're not done," she said, because the verdict against Vaughn was more than a conviction. It was a crack in the wall, one big enough to let the light pour through. Within 48 hours, Westbridge's Internal Affairs Division launched a full-scale audit of all misconduct investigations dating back 10 years. Dozens of previously buried complaints were reopened. The list included more than just Vaughn officers with similar patterns of abuse. Same names in the review files. Same signatures on the dismissals. 3 captains resigned within the first week. 1 union board member stepped down the next morning. A 4th tried to scrub his name from archived case memos, but Claire's team had already flagged him. The review expanded beyond Westbridge. The governor issued a formal request for a special grand jury to examine the statewide practices of officer discipline, citing significant public interest and patterns of obstruction. And quietly, behind closed doors, Claire received 2 calls, one from the state's attorney general, offering resources, the other from the U.S. Department of Justice, requesting a meeting. The ripples had become a wave, and while the town and state wrestled with their new reckoning, Hazel Greene slowly found her way back to herself. Her first full conversation came on a Tuesday morning in October, nearly 6 weeks after the trial ended. Claire was sitting by the window of Hazel's rehab room, her legal briefs resting in her lap, unread. Hazel shifted slightly in bed and said, "So, did the world change while I was out?" Claire laughed. Not a big one, just enough to make her eyes wet. "You'd be surprised," she whispered. "You did that." Hazel looked down at her hands. They still trembled when she tried to hold a cup, but she didn't seem to mind. "I was afraid," she admitted. "In that moment, I kept thinking I was too old to make a difference. Too small, too easy to ignore." "You weren't," Claire said. "You never were." Hazel smiled. It was soft and quiet, but proud. "I didn't plan to step in. You know, I didn't think I'd end up here, but I just kept hearing my own voice from all those years in the library telling children to speak up, ask questions, stand for others. I couldn't be the one who stayed silent." Claire reached for her mother's hand, laced her fingers gently through hers. "You weren't silent. Mom, you were the beginning." Later that week, the City Council of Westbridge voted unanimously to rename a section of Juniper Avenue the street where the incident happened. They called it Hazel Way. No parades, no speeches, just a new sign on the corner post. The next morning, someone left a handwritten note at the base. It read, "Because you spoke, we listened. Because you stood, we moved. Thank you for showing us that silence is a choice and courage is contagious." And somewhere, in the quiet morning light, Hazel Greene's story moved from tragedy to testimony, from victim to voice, from bystander to beacon. The system had tried to bury her beneath shame, beneath spin, beneath fear. But she had risen, and in doing so, she had pulled the truth with her out into the open air, where even the loudest lies couldn't silence it anymore. The first meeting of the Hazel Greene Task Force took place on a windy Saturday morning in early November. Inside the auditorium of Westbridge Public Library, the same library Hazel had worked in for nearly 30 years, and the same building where she'd taught generations of children the power of words, books, and speaking up. There was no stage fanfare, no ceremonial ribbon cutting, just folding chairs, a whiteboard, and a room filled with people who'd decided silence was no longer an option. Claire Greene stood at the front, her mother's favorite scarf draped around her neck like armor. The auditorium, meant to seat about 80, had over 100 attendees, students, teachers, former officers, parents, journalists, even a few retired judges. They weren't there out of curiosity. They were there because something had shifted in Westbridge, and no one wanted to let it slip back into the shadows. "We are not here to point fingers," Claire began, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. "We are here to shine light. The kind of light that exposes patterns, protects communities, and holds power accountable. This task force will not be symbolic. It will be functional." She outlined the purpose of the Hazel Greene Task Force, a citizen-led committee with access to internal police disciplinary records, the ability to issue public reports, and legal backing from the district attorney's office to compel testimony in officer misconduct cases. It was, in every sense, a revolution in transparency. Claire's proposal had stunned even seasoned reform advocates, but it passed the City Council in a unanimous vote just 2 weeks after the Vaughan verdict. The pressure from the public, the integrity of the investigation, and Hazel's name carried a weight that no political force dared challenge. "This is not about vengeance," Claire reminded the room. "It's about vision. at the back of the room, standing against a bookshelf lined with historical biographies, was 16-year-old Andre Lewis, dressed in a navy sweater and dark jeans. He looked older than he had just 3 months before. Not physically, but in the way he stood, in the way he watched. When Claire gestured toward him, Andre stepped forward, holding a small stack of note cards. He cleared his throat once, then spoke without looking down. I used to think courage looked like something big, like running into danger or standing on a stage. But I saw courage on a sidewalk. It was 70 years old and had silver hair and didn't raise her voice once. She just stepped forward when nobody else did. The room held its breath. And if she could do that, Andre continued, his voice steady now, then I can speak in front of you. That moment changed everything for Andre. He began speaking at school's first 1, then 3, then nearly a dozen. He talked about civic courage, about knowing your rights, about how being calm in the face of power is its own kind of defiance. He never called himself a hero. He always redirected the conversation to Hazel. But every student who listened knew what he'd lived through and who he'd become because of it. One teacher, after a school assembly, pulled Claire aside and whispered, "You didn't just save a case, you helped raise a leader." Meanwhile, Hazel's recovery continued slowly, but with growing strength. She was walking again, first with a cane, then without one. Her speech had returned in full. Her memory, too, and every time she saw another news article, another task force update, or another one of Andre's speeches, she would simply say, "Look at what happened because I didn't walk away." People stopped her at grocery stores, in parks, outside the pharmacy where it all began. Some thanked her, some cried, some asked for a photo, and Hazel, never one to seek the spotlight, accepted it with grace, not because she craved attention, but because she knew what it meant to be seen. One afternoon, a local high school invited her to speak. She almost declined, but Claire smiled and said, "Mom, they need to hear your voice, just like I did." So Hazel went. She didn't prepare a speech. She just told them the truth. "I was scared," she said plainly. Not just of that officer, but of what might happen after, of being labeled, of being doubted, of being forgotten. But I spoke anyway, because silence has never kept us safe, it only keeps things the same. She looked out at the crowd of young faces. If you see something wrong, say something, even if your voice shakes, even if you're alone, because you might not be. The students gave her a standing ovation. That video, captured by a school staffer and uploaded online, went viral. Within 48 hours, it had over 300,000 views. News anchors called her the librarian who changed Westbridge. One op-ed dubbed her America's Quiet Revolution. But Hazel, in her own living room, just shook her head and said, "I was never quiet. People just didn't expect me to speak." By the end of the year, the Hazel Greene task force had opened 5 new cases and triggered 2 officer resignations. The task force held public forums, took anonymous complaints, and worked with legal scholars to propose broader statewide legislation. Claire's office was flooded with letters from other jurisdictions asking how to replicate the model. But for Claire, it always came back to one thing: legacy. Not just her mother's legacy, but the legacy they were now shaping together, a legacy of ordinary courage, made extraordinary by its refusal to stay silent. On the last day of the year, Claire stood once more inside the library auditorium, this time with her mother beside her and Andre standing just off stage. She looked out at the crowd, now full of new faces, young organizers, retired judges, students, former skeptics turned believers. "This task force is not the end," Claire said. "It is the beginning of a city that refuses to turn away from its reflection. The beginning of accountability that does not depend on who's watching. The beginning of a legacy where every voice matters and where no act of courage, however quiet, goes unheard." Hazel reached for Claire's hand, and as the crowd rose to their feet again, applauding not just a verdict, but a movement, one truth settled into the foundation of Westbridge's future. Even one voice spoken softly, bravely, without backing down, can change everything. What happened in Westbridge wasn't just a courtroom drama, it was a wake-up call, a mirror, and a map. It reminded all of us that silence is not safety, and bystanders are never truly neutral. From Hazel Greene's quiet act of courage on a neighborhood sidewalk to her daughter Claire's unflinching pursuit of justice, this story showed what can happen when ordinary people decide they've seen enough. It takes just one moment, one voice to break the silence. It took one 70-year-old woman stepping forward, one teenager refusing to run, and one prosecutor saying, "No more." And from that courage, ripples became waves, a conviction, resignations, reforms, and the birth of a task force that put power on notice. But the lessons of Westbridge don't belong to one town. They belong to every American citizen, whether you live in a small suburb or a bustling city. The truth is, the same justice depends on participation. We cannot wait for someone else to speak, to film, to question, to act, because accountability begins with awareness, and awareness begins with us. We must teach our children that courage isn't just for heroes, it's for librarians, students, mothers, and neighbors. We must ask hard questions of those who wear the badge, and harder ones of those who protect them at any cost. And when the time comes, we must stand, not for applause, but for principle. So if this story moved you, if Hazel's voice stirred something inside you, don't let that feeling pass. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their voice matters. Like it if you believe in everyday bravery. And subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next story that challenges us to grow, to learn, and to act. Because, here, we don't just tell stories, we tell truths that spark change. If you're with us, if you believe that justice isn't just a courtroom word, but a civic duty, we ask you to stay engaged. Your click might be small, but its impact could be larger than you know. And in a world that often tells us to look away, choosing to witness, to speak, and to stand is the beginning of everything. Let's keep building the legacy that Hazel Greene started, one act of courage at a time.